So I wanted to use a class project example. This won't be a walkthrough, but it'll give you an idea of how to actually structure these pages to get the correct layout. So here we have the profile page project, which I see a lot of either people struggling or thriving with. It really depends. I see people talking about, spending 12 plus hours on it, and that's good. That means that you're trying to learn, you're trying to figure out new ways to do things. And this is probably the biggest project you've had so far. But I wanted to show really quick how I would outline each of these elements, and then I'll build one of them, probably the profile. So we'll probably build the nav bar up here together, but everything else I will not. Just to give you an idea of how I structure things and how I look at the page when I'm given a markup like this to copy. So I'm going to represent this with black boxes. When designing a page, I'm going to use one of these sections as an example. So I'm going to go a little bit outside of it just to prove a point. So we have the main container, which is like this. Okay. Now inside of it, I see two separate containers. One for this colored header, like that. We'll use blue, and one for this bottom area. Now, if we divide it up into like this, we could see that there's one main container, and then we have this in a column kind of look, okay? That means there's flexbox being used, okay? So we have the upper area and the bottom area, and we can see clearly now that all these things inside are also in a column, and they're to the left. This, however, is the strange thing, which is in the middle of two things. Now, there's a few ways to do it. You could use position relative and make it relative to either one of these containers and then just move it up or down in comparison. That way, if you were to resize the window, it would stay where it is relative to the parent. You could also use negative margin. That would also work as well, which might be a preferred method, which would mean you would either put this image in here on the top header or on the bottom and just use negative in either direction to push it up a little bit. It'll bleed into another element. And that's another way to do it, which may be easier depending on how you see it. So let's look at this header really quick and use black. Maybe not black because it's already black. So the header goes all the way across. So to me, that screams that it's going to have 100% width right away. Now we have more stuff inside, but it's confined. And if we look at the entire page as a whole, say using blue, we can see that everything is confined to this width, like that. So that tells me that there is another container inside of the header. And I'll make it and represent it here. I'm trying to do this and keep all the colors so that you can tell. And it'll look something like that. Okay, and that also goes for the body. So if I grabbed another color, purple, and did the same thing here, you would see that there is another container inside of the body itself that is separating these internal elements from the header, and they're all confined to this width. But the main navigational container has a width of 100%, and the inner container has a width of whatever that is. If we did it in percentages, I would say 2/3 to 70% width, something like that. And I'm going to represent that now here. So, and of course we can draw boxes across the entire page here, but I wanted to give you an example here of exactly how you would structure this. So let's go off of this example. Okay, I'm going to make a basic outline using the autocomplete, and I'm going to put a nav element, which is going to represent the entire nav bar, not just the inner portion. Okay, and on the inside, I'm going to put a div. The reason I'm using a div is because there's nothing special about this particular area. It's just containing the nav elements, so there's no good reason to use another nav. You shouldn't have two navs. So inside the div, let's look at this. Maybe I should bring it over here. So let's look at what's in it. We have a large text that says profile. We have 3 buttons, I assume. And then we have, or links, I should say. And then we have 1 button all the way at the end. So what does that tell me? Well, it tells me that these on the left are in their own container. So we can draw that out. It's getting harder to draw these and make them make sense, but you're getting the point. So we have another container here, and then a button on its own. So that tells me that this has justify space between. What space between does is it pushes all elements inside as far as they can go from each other. Okay? So that's what's happening here. We're seeing it going all the way to the left, and this one going all the way to the right. So that tells me that's how this layout is stepped out. So let's go ahead and make that. So I'm going to say H1. And what did it have? Profile. And why don't we structure this so that you can actually read it like that. Now, let's see what else here. We have 3 anchor tags, but they're not anchor tags, but they are. So we have to style them accordingly. So here, I'm seeing, since there's 3 links back to back, I'm going to put them in an unordered list because it's a list of anchor tags. So I'm going to do a UL and then 3 LIs like that. And if you want to know how I did that, how I copied it so quick, it's Shift, Left, Alt, and down arrow. It'll copy exactly what you have on the line you're clicked on down. So that's really good. So we have Home, My Profile, and Find Connections. Now these should also have anchor tags in them. So I'm going to make an anchor tag, and then I'm just going to copy that. And then inside the anchor tag, I'm going to do Home. Oops. Home, My Profile, and oops, too much. Find Connections, right? Yes. Okay, so if I refresh my page, you can see that it looks like this. This is ideally not what we want. And I didn't link my CSS, so I'm going to do styles.css like that. I got to make the file too, so there we go. Okay, I'm going to put my CSS down here. And the first thing I'm going to do, just because it's something I always do, is star, open it, margin 0, padding 0, and that should get rid of all extra spacing, that because ULs tend to have weird spacing, so it's good to get rid of that. Okay, so I'm going to put this down a little bit. And what else? We have, so inside this main div, which is what we have here, we have the profile and the 3 links, and that's what we have. And then we have a button under it. So under the div, but still in the nav, I'm going to make a button, sign out. Refresh. There's our button. So the first thing I'm going to do is create the background that we have here so that it stretches across and makes it making it a flex container. So down here, I'm going to pull it up. I have no good reason to add a class or an ID to this because there's normally only one nav in a page. Sometimes there might be more than one, but it's very specific cases. So I can just style the nav directly. We can do display flex, and I shouldn't have to do anything else. So that's exactly what I expected because we have an inner div that contains 4 things and then a button. And this actual container is flexing everything inside of it. So that makes sense. So now that we have flex, I also like to do align items center. That'll align them up and down. It doesn't show it much now, but the button actually got smaller because it's not auto sizing it to the height of the container. So that's actually good. Now the next thing we need to do is style that div to make it row. Make it a row. So the div, I'm going to add an ID because this is very specific. I'm going to call it nav-container because even though the nav itself is the main container, this is actually what's containing the inside. So I'm going to grab the nav container, bring it down here. We're going to do display flex on it as well, and then we should see it. There we go. Now these popped into a row. Now I'm going to justify content, center. Actually, no. I'm not going to do that yet, but I am going to align items. Align items center. There it goes. So now the profile went center. Now these list elements are also inside of another container. So I need to make an ID on here, and I'm going to make it nav container dash left because it's the left side of the container. When you look at it, you can see that this is the left side of the main container. That makes sense to me. Whether it does to you, you can name it however you want. This is my naming conventions. And inside here also, I'm going to do another display flex. And what that's going to do is stretch those elements out into a line. So now we have them in the right order. Okay. Now, we need to get them, we need to have space in between. You can hear my dog in the background. I'm sorry, but he's a barking boy. So we need to create the width of the nav. Now the nav needs to be 100%. So I'm going to do width 100% like that. Now, it didn't show anything yet, but if I add a background color of black, we can represent that better. There we go. Now, a lot of stuff has disappeared. So I'm also going to do color white. Now, this is the parent container. It won't show up for everything, but the dots did. Now, I want to get rid of those dots. So inside of the UL, since all these lists are going to be exactly the same, I see no good reason to add classes to each one. So I'm actually going to do this and then do li, saying that every list item inside of this ID gets this styling. We're going to do list style none, just like that. That'll get rid of those dots. There they go. And we actually don't need to color anything in here because of the next step. The next step is we need to do the anchor tag. So the same style, but I'm going to add an A after it, and then I'm also going to do link. That's going to style every single link that is unvisited. Now, I've visited these already because of cookies on my system, but all I can do now is I can do the same thing. I can do a comma, add the same thing, but instead of link, I can do visited, and that'll be representing visited links. So both link and visited links should be white. If I refresh, boom, no more weird colors. We also need to do text decoration to none to get rid of that underlining. So there we go. We just got rid of all the formatting issues in regards to making them look like lists and links. So now they still function as links. If I click them, it'll try to refresh, which is good, but there's no href, so it's not going anywhere. Okay, so let's get back to styling the main container. We need to figure out, so here's the inner container, the nav container. We want to make this a particular width. So in order to do that, we need to justify it here. We'll say 70%. Okay, that looks right, but we need to get it centered. So in the main container, we're going to do justify content center. There it goes. So now it has centered it. Now I think that might be a little too much space, at least for this example. So I'm going to do 60. There we go. Now, in order to add spacing in the appropriate place, we just need to add margin left to each of these items here. So we can go into here. Each li is going to get margin left, say, I don't know, 10 pixels as a test. There they go. Maybe a little more, say 15. Better, not quite. Let's go 20. There we go. So it looks a little better. Now the height is completely off, and that's in the main container. So we can change the height here to, I don't know, 100 pixels. Ooh, way too much. Way too much. Let's try 60. Better. That's actually pretty close. I'm going to keep that. Now, I can see already the button needs to be styled. We got everything roughly in the right spot. Profile needs to be bigger text, so why don't we do that? So inside of nav container, I'm going to access the only H1 that's in there, like this. Font size. Now I'm going to do something like this, say 20 pixels. Is that smaller? That is smaller. All right, well now I have a frame of reference. Let's double it. Too big. 1.5. That looks closer. I'm going with that. So the last thing to do is to style this button. So in the nav, we're going to go down here. I'm going to do nav and then button. And it looks like it needs background color. I don't know what that color would be. I guess we can go with blue. No. Let's see what teal looks like, and then we'll kind of like mess with it from there. That's close. And let's make the color white. There we go. Now let's do We don't need margin, but we do need padding. So why don't we do a padding of 5 pixels for up and down and 10 for left and right. That looks pretty close. So I'm going to go with that. The color is a little off. We need to brighten it. So I'm going to brighten it just a little like that. Closer. I think the padding on the up and down might be too much. So I'm going to go to 3 instead. There we go. That looks pretty good. So the only thing left to do would be to create this in a slightly whiter color. So the best way I can do that is to actually... That's not what I meant. A little less like that for everything. So it darkens like that, and then my profile needs a ID. And I'm going to call it nav selected. I'm going to grab it. And here are where my links are. I'm going to put it down here. Nav selected. And I believe because we are using link and visited, I'm going to do link. And then nav selected visited. And those are going to be converted to the color white. So we're going to do a class of navlink, and we're going to copy that into each one. We're going to keep that ID, but we're going to keep that on each one. So instead, I can get rid of the A and the LI and everything except for the visited. Do .navlink, just like that, because we're accessing it directly now. .navlink, and now this is more specific than this, so it should take over for my profile. And it does. It went a little more white. I might have to make this a little darker to make it obvious. So go down a little bit like that. There we go. So now you can really see, if I bring this up, these two are faded out. This one is whiter, and we're getting that here. And because there's still links, we get the little mouse over icon that shows like the finger saying, please click me. Now, the only thing left to do that I can really see is maybe changing the font, but I don't think, yeah, why not? So I like to go to Google Fonts. It's just literally just type in Google Fonts. It's fonts.google.com. I want to use Roboto or Roboto, whatever it's called. And the ones I like to grab is always regular, 400 regular and italic, and then bold 700 and bold 700 italic. Now, what that's going to do is I can select here to look at the families that I've gotten. Here's all 4. And down here, it's going to tell you how to import it. I like to use the @import without the style. So I just do the inside. I'm going to copy that. And then at the top of my CSS file, and I mean at the very top, we're going to paste it there. Okay, what that's going to do is that's going to grab the direct link without having to download anything. And then down here, we have CSS rules. We copy that. And we use the font family rules inside of our star. That means everything's going to have this. So as soon as I refresh, we can see the font updated. And actually, it's probably closer to the project now. It is. It actually looks closer to the way it's expected to look. So I hope this has given you some insight on like how you can structure something and the way how I outline stuff before I start to understand what the goal is.